We're with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library, and we're today in Mead, Oklahoma, to speak with Bob Rawls. And today is July the 2nd, 2011. So thank you for inviting us into your home.
Sure.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, when, and then we'll just work forward.
Well, I was born in Dixon, Illinois. My mother and father were traveling with a show called Ayers and Catherine Davies Circus, and they wintered in Dixon, Illinois. My mother had me. Most of my family were born in the winter, in the off season. I was born in June the 8th, and which was an unusual thing. So my mom had to leave the show, come back to winter quarters, have me, and then go back to the show. But there were only 2 children in my family born in Dixon, Illinois, myself and my sister Margaret. And those are early memories, vague memories of the circus. I don't really remember a lot about the circus until I was 4 or 5 years old. And then I began performing immediately at 5.
Doing what?
I was the kid, my dad did a rolling globe act, and where he juggled on standing on a giant ball. And one of the finish trick was to get me to stand in front of the ball. He'd reach down and pick me up by my hands, set me on the ball, then reach down and grab me again, bring me up to his shoulders, set me on his shoulders, then I'd stand on his shoulders, and we'd both stop. A little kid doing that brought down the house, usually. And that was my earliest memories of performing. Right after that, my brother and I formed what we called the Jumping Jacks. We were trampoline performers. And we did a double routine every day, twice a day, on the trampoline as well. Later on, I decided I wanted to be a tight wire walker. And so I trained to do that. And all this training was difficult to teach somebody to perform professionally. But my mother was almost like a ballet teacher. I mean, that's how graceful she was and how beautiful she styled. And she taught us all how to respect the audience. Don't turn your back on the audience. No matter what's happening in your life, you're smiling and you're having a good time. And that was the idea. And we were trained rigorously to do tight wire walking. You start with a low wire about 2 feet off the ground. It's made of steel cable. Then you wear small leather pumps so that you can feel the wire. But it's very hard on the feet. So every year before we started out, I'd spend 2 or 3 weeks working on the low wire and barely being able to walk because your feet were so sore and bruised. And that would be just before we left school. We usually left school a month early and came in a month late. We had to make up our lessons in advance when we left, and we had to do our lessons and send them in when we were coming back in. Later on, the school refused to do that when I was in high school, and my folks left us with people so that we could finish school and then rejoin the show as soon as we got out of school. But that was always hard on my folks. It was better if they could take us with us because, we did like 11 acts, and that's almost a whole circus. You throw in a few animals and you got a whole circus. In fact, there was a fellow later on that did it on Fairyland Circus, and we were about the only people on the show other than the animal handlers. And we did 11 acts. They made up a program with all of our pictures on it and all of that. And we usually had to stand and sign autographs at the end of the show, on the pictures. But it just was an odd place to grow up. It had its inherent dangers, but I wouldn't trade it for anything on earth. Later on, my senior trip was to Vietnam. And my brother and I both went to Vietnam. And I believe that we survived it because of our skills and our abilities that we learned and the hardships that we went through on show business. My brother had 3 squads that all were killed or wounded in Vietnam. He was about the sole survivor. And I give that as a testament to his earlier life. He just knew when to duck. He knew how to be faster. He knew what line to get in and what line to get out of. And I did the same thing. So I think it really served us well when we went back. We got back from Vietnam. All we wanted to do was get back in show business. And we did. When I was 8 years old, I had an accident on the circus. It was about the time of my birthday because I remember I had a quarter in my shoe. but the Horse Act had bought a new horse, and the horse was a rodeo trained horse to rope and calf roping, and I was going to be the cow that day. So he roped me and tied the rope off to the saddle horn, just like any cowboy would do, and he jumped off to come over and tie me up like a cow. Well, the horse got scared. It was unfamiliar with the territory. We were right in the backyard of the tent, Circus, and it took off running. Well, I got the rope off of me all the way to here when another horse stepped on me and the rope went around my neck. And the horse dragged me for several blocks. My dad actually outran the horse and stopped it. They didn't give me much for my chances. They told my folks I wouldn't make it through the night. I spent 3 years in and out of hospitals with operations down in Houston, in the Shrine Hospital and the Texas Children's Hospital, where they rebuilt my throat and put my neck back together. And I came back, and the only thing I wanted to do was get back into show business. And I became a performer seriously after that accident. But the circus always had dangers. My brother was clawed by lions. I always had to feed some of the caged animals, and that's a dangerous job for a young guy. But to feed a tiger or a baboon or a chimpanzee or a lion. There was a deal in circus business that you sign on to be such and such, but you make yourself generally useful in all departments. And so whatever happened to the circus as a whole, it affected everybody. So if there was a storm coming, everybody was out there. If the tent got blown down and ripped up, everybody went out there and sewed the tent back up so that we could get back with our business, It's a tight-knit group on a circus. A small town that moves to small towns around the country. We've probably been in almost every state in the Union, most of Canada. Spent a lot of time in Canada because Canada doesn't have a lot of entertainment, so circuses were a big deal in Canada. I've been all the way up to northern Quebec with the shows. I know how to put up a tent and take it down, any size tent you want. And I've put up some of the largest tents in America. When I worked with Popcorn, I was the boss canvasman. The boss canvasman was in charge of putting up the big top and all the seating that went inside of it. And I had a crew of about 40 guys, and we put up a tent that was probably 120 feet wide and 380 feet long. It's a huge tent. I also put up the tent for Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers. It was a little different type of tent. It was a bale ring top. A bale ring top, they set up the center poles first, they spread the canvas all around the bale ring top, and then they pull it up like a giant curtain on the poles. And that's a bale ring top. It's a completely different affair than a push pole top. Most of the tents you see are push poles.
And how long would it take to put one up?
It would take, approximately 2-3 hours to put it up if you had a good crew. And it would take about an hour and a half to tear it down. Much faster coming down than going up. But you got into such a routine that everybody had his little job, and and you just kind of oversaw that all those jobs were done safely. We've lost a lot of people putting up tents. I remember one day on Royal Brothers Circus in Canada, when they pull a push pole, they get a push pole tent up in the air, they have a jigger line that runs across the top of the center poles and down each end to secure those poles. And they're hooked to pulleys on a dead man's stakeout on each end of the tent, just to pull it tight and to make it safe. In Canada, we pulled the tent up, and they didn't check overhead before they put the tent. The first thing you always do is check overhead. The tent pole hit a high tension wire, high power line, 750,000 volts. The boss canvasman was a good friend of mine, Bob. Big Bob Rayburn was his name. And his son was on the other end of the jigger line. And when he pulled that jigger line tight, it hit that power line, and 750,000 volts went down into the poles and down that jigger line. His son was electrocuted instantly, but was still standing, and Big Bob ran the length of the tent and dove at him and put his hand right in his chest to knock him off of that thing. It was way too late by then. It was over by then. But when Bob touched him, he was electrocuted instantly as well. There's a lot of stories like that around the show, and we lost a lot of people along the way. because of mistakes, because, some you can't predict and some you can't get around and some you should have. But it's a dangerous, dangerous occupation. No matter what you're doing around the show, it can be dangerous. But we all looked out for each other. My mom had 8 kids altogether, but 6 kids most of the time, and we were scattered all over the lot. Everybody knew us. If we were doing something wrong, everybody had the right to correct us, So it was a big family, and everybody watched out. When I was 3, I got bitten by a bear. Now, this is almost prior to my memory. I still had the scars on my rump, but the bear wouldn't let me go. They had tied the bear out under a truck to clean out his cage, and I didn't know he was there. And I was walking around the big top, and the bear got me. And he just bit into my rump and was shaking me around like a rag doll. They took a sledgehammer to the bear to get him to let go. Bears can be really dangerous. And he let go, and I survived that one too. Survive all of these things as it goes along. And all I really wanted to do was get back to show business whenever I was hurt. I just wanted to get back into show business. I loved being a performer. But you can only do that sort of thing for so long. At about 35, I was wearing out bad. My legs were gone, my knees were gone. I'd had multiple injuries from the tight wire and from trampoline. And I finally got out of that and got into the management end of show business and more of the painting end. That was always the hardest. When I got my neck broke, I couldn't talk for a long time. And they gave me a magic slate. So I would talk with remember the old magic slate? I would talk with the magic slate, but I'd also draw pictures. If I couldn't write what I wanted to say, I'd draw a picture of it. And that's where I started doing my artwork. And from then on, everybody would always see me drawing. Well, if you're an artist, well, you can paint this rigging here, or you can paint this truck here, And so I always got those jobs, and that's how I evolved into a circus painter. I took that knowledge and came here, bought that little house up there, and decided I was going to get off the road for a while. So I opened up a sign shop, and I just went up and down the highway selling signs for $10 a sign, whatever. And I maintained the sign shop for 15 years here. But we always went back to the circus and worked on the circus. My wife, like I said, my present wife, worked on the circus with me as the secretary to the owner. And I was the manager at the time, so we were very busy all the time. We had 2 children who lived in a little trailer behind this number 11 there. They were parked right behind that every day. And the clowns would come out of their little sleepers and they would check on my kids, because we were doing our jobs around the lot. And so the kids pretty much were left to fare on their own. They had strict rules and regulations, and if they stepped out of that, we knew about it. Somebody told us. So we would keep track of them that way. We, if we got a 5-minute break, we'd run in and check on them. But for the most part, they were on their own. And they traveled with us at night. We'd get in the truck and trailer and head off, and they'd be in the back in a crib or whatever. And they were raised pretty much out there on the circus. I've got a picture of my daughter at the age of 3 watering an elephant, So, and she loved it. She loved it. Both my kids really liked show business. My son went back later on and became an elephant handler with Kelly Miller Circus for 2 or 3 years before he decided to join the Army. Right now he's in Iraq, and he's got 4 weeks left of his second tour. And we are really looking forward to his return. My daughter is in New York. Her husband is a major in the Army, and he is leaving on the 17th of July for Afghanistan. He's been over there 4 times and received the Bronze Star already. So we're pretty proud of both of them. Doing a great job. I'd just be glad when they get him out of Iraq this time. I think it's been more dangerous this tour than any tour, because they've made them non-combatants. But my ability to manage people and deal with people and deal with the public kind of lent itself to being in a community, which I'd never done before in my life. And when I came here, we started the sign shop. I also became the fire chief for West Bryan County, I guess because I had a way with people more than anything. And I wanted to give something back. I wanted to be a part of the community, so I wanted to give something to the community. So I became fire chief and was fire chief for many years here. And fought fires whenever I was in town. Now in the wintertime, I was usually in Florida painting circuses or something like that. And we took sabbaticals, a year here, 2 years there, where we'd just be here, making sure our kids got an education, and they worked with us in the sign shop. And we all worked together. It was a way to have children without having to put them in daycare or have somebody else raise them or have them on their own. They just stayed with us all the time, no matter what we did. And because of that, I think that they're a little more well-versed. My son fits in real well in Iraq, in a place where people don't know how to construct or run electricity or things like that. David's pretty well-versed in that, so you can do that. He's also well-versed in being uncomfortable and working hard and 7 days a week and all hours of the day and night. So I think this stands him in good stead. I have faith in him very much because of his background, even the short background that he had in the circus. When I was a kid, there were hundreds of circuses running across this country, all in canvas tents. In the wintertime, we'd take those tents out and we'd boil paraffin wax. And we'd take large mops and we'd mop the top of the tent with wax. And that made it waterproof. Let the rain shed off of the tent. But it also made it a torch. And you probably heard about the fire in New London, Connecticut, where the Ringling Show set up their tent. The fire got started. The tent just went up instantly. It's an old canvas tent, but they'd paraffin. And a lot of people got killed that day. It would never happen anymore because first of all tents now are made of vinyl. And they're chemical put on them so that they're fireproof. But even still today, I've taken Clyde Beatty into New London, Connecticut, and we have to surround that tent with a charged water line and have 8 firemen on duty all day long while we're showing in New London, Connecticut because of that fire. That was my job on the circus. Not only did I have to handle any of the problems with the performers, and there wasn't that many because performers know what they're doing in show business. You park your trailer, you get your equipment up, you do your job. No matter what, you do your job. But my job was to handle their complaints, make sure that they were all comfortable and had what they needed, water and lights and all of this stuff. It was also my job to liaison with the town folk. And on Clyde Beatty, we played Queens, we played New London, we played all the big towns up and down the East Coast. So there was always 4 or 5 inspectors that would come out and want to inspect everything that you're doing, the concession stand and all that. Well, all these departments knew what they were supposed to do. It was my job to take these guys around and point out, yes, we are complying, because we're inspected more than anybody. When you come in and you got an inspector from a local town, now if he goes into a local cafe, he might have a problem shutting them down, but he wouldn't have any problem at all shutting the circus down because he didn't know any of us. So you had to be very careful and handle these people with kid gloves. We've handled some very large operations and serious operations with Clyde Beatty. All the trucks had to get on the lot. You couldn't be without one truck. If one truck broke down, you had to go back and get it somehow and get it to the lot. These are all my job, And I would report to the owner, who showed up every now and then. But I enjoyed the job of manager. I enjoyed it. I thought it was challenging, and we did black ties and things like that all over the country, and always doing television, TV interviews, and TV people coming and spending weeks with the show. They did it on my family twice. There was a program called Discovery 67. It was a PBS program. They spent 2 weeks with the show filming, and they rode in the cars and the trucks with us at night and everything. They stayed right with us the whole time. And they did a program. Another one later on was something 1, 2, 3. It was a PBS program too, where they just lived. I've got that video over here, but they just lived with the show and photograph and film us while we were working. We got used to it. We didn't pay any attention to it. We would wind up. I remember on Carson and Barnes when I was the boss canvas, and we had a Coors, I believe it was. Not sure whether it was Coors or Budweiser, came out to do a commercial on the show. And they wanted to catch the burly roustabouts pulling that canvas when the sun came up, you know. And then after that, no, it was Miller time. After that, it was Miller time, and you go have your beer, you know, and they'd have these big tubs of beer and all that stuff. Of course, popcorn was on the show at that time. And I remember having to they said, you need to be at the next lot, you need to raise the tent right as the sun is coming up. Well, in order to do that, I had to send a steak truck and a crew over early and put all the steaks down on the pins over there. And then when the show finally did arrive, we'd spread the canvas that night instead of going to sleep. We spread it that night. And as the sun come up, here goes the tent up in the air. Well, as I'm going up with the tent and the sun's coming up, these TV people drive up and say, we're a little late. Can you take it down and do it again? And we did. We took it all down and put it all back up again for a TV commercial. It's enough to drive you crazy, especially when you're as tight, everything's as tight as it is around the show. But these were just things that happened all the time. Driving truck. Everybody had to drive a truck. One of my earliest memories, as soon as I got my license, I was driving a truck over the road at night.
A semi? Or?
Yeah, later on it was a semi. I drove this is number 11 here. I drove number 16. 16 was a support truck for this truck. Then 16 was all the supplies, popcorn boxes, snow cone cups, Coca-Cola, syrup, peanuts, popcorn, everything is in number 11. And the concession manager's office was in number 11. And it parked right behind, I'm not number 11, number 16. It parked right behind number 11 so that they could ferry all that stuff right into the wagon during performances when they needed it. And I drove number 16 for several years. They used to get mad at me. My dad was concession manager for a while, and that was his office I was driving. And all of his supplies and everything, and if I didn't do it correctly, why all that stuff was on the floor when he walked in the morning, you know, and that was a mess. But driving truck, I never did like driving truck, but it was just part of the deal, you know. You work all day and you drive truck all night. And that's the way it was. And I'm sure it was dangerous. It certainly caused a lot of accidents. I remember many accidents on the Circus. There were some trucks that were more difficult than others. If you're carrying, for instance, I drove an elephant truck on Doyle Brothers Circus in Quebec. Well, in Quebec, they don't have highways. They have dirt roads. And so you're driving these trucks full of elephants in the backwoods. And I remember one night having a problem, and the truck backed down, and half of the truck was hanging over a precipice. And a French guy, they're all French in Quebec, stops with his truck and says, can I help you? And I said, well, sure. He was speaking French, and we were trying to work it out. And I said, I got a problem. I'm over here. Maybe you can pull me off this precipice with a chain or something. I'll get a chain. And he walks back there, and the truck is sitting there rocking like this on the precipice. And he says, he points to the truck and asks me what's in it. And I said, elefante. There was 3 elephants in there. And he just shook his head and got in his truck and drove off. There are many occasions you have to empty those elephants out of that truck and get that truck where it needs to be and then put the elephants back in. You have to have enough wherewithal to do that because elephants are very dangerous animals. For the most part, they're domesticated, but an animal is an animal. It doesn't have human traits. It doesn't think like a human. And when you cage it and take it out of its environment, it can do anything at any time. And I've seen animals respond what it looks like bad behavior. It's not. It's just a defense. I've seen elephants rampage and squash cars and throw people around, but it's a defense mechanism. You've got that elephant in a place where it's not normally shouldn't be. Elephants are very smart creatures. They know their handlers. They know who's supposed to be there. They know what condition they're supposed to be in. They know where the food's at. They know if there's food in your pocket. On many occasions, my wife would send cookies to my son out there working the elephants, and he'd stick them in his pocket while he's working the elephants, and they'd find the cookies in the pocket, you know. With their little trunk, they'd sniff around, and they'd find those cookies. But elephants, very intelligent creature. I always had a great deal of respect for elephants. but they are animals. All of them are animals. I've seen tigers tear people up. I've seen elephants tear people up. I've seen a lot of that sort of stuff, but mostly because of something stupid, something that was out of line. I know I've seen drunks come up and try to play with that. Oh, here's a peanut for the elephant, and just irritate the heck out of the elephant until the elephant gets enough and picks him up and just throws him somewhere. That could kill you, you know. So we try to keep people away from things like that, and always keep the handler that's supposed to be with that elephant should be there, and you avoid a lot of that. It's changed a lot, but you have all these elephants in America. I mean, all these animals. At least they have a place where they're utilized. Now, in my day, it was $30,000 to buy an elephant, so you didn't do anything to hurt that elephant. They're impossible to get. You can't even import them anymore. So elephants have to be born in this country if there's new elephants in this country. But the circus always gave the elephant a place to be. And he got his feed, and he got his water, and he was washed and scrubbed, and he did his act every day. And to me, it was kind of like how humans and animals can interact with each other. And I think it worked very well. There were many cases of in the early days of people mistreating animals around circuses. But I don't think you'd ever find that today, even though PETA says it happens all the time. Just to have an elephant in the circus is harmful to the elephant. Well, what happens if you don't? I mean, where does the elephant go? What are you going to do with an elephant? There's only one or two sanctuaries that I know of that'll even take an elephant in. And you have to be careful about that. If you got a herd of elephants, they know each other. You bring another elephant in, you got problems. So you got to be careful about things like that. Is there anything else I can?
Before we move from the tricks, you want to tell about the numbering?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a model of the trucks that I used to do, and the lettering and everything has been reproduced just exactly the way I did it. And there's numbers on the back and the front of each truck, and these numbers signify what the truck is, what its job is, and where it goes in its position on the lot. And when you refer to this truck, this is the office truck, but they'd say, oh, go to the office, you can understand that, or they'd say, go to 33, and that's the number of the office. I know most of the truck numbers of most of the shows in the country, the ones that are still going, because I painted them.
How did the numberings get started?
Well, it got started on the Ringling show. When the train came into town, they'd have all these wagons on the flatbeds on the train, and they'd have to take the wagons off and move them to the auditorium or wherever field that they were setting up or whatever. And so they numbered these trailers, because there were many of them. There were 60, 70 of these things. And they numbered these things so that the men would know exactly where to take that unit off the train and to its location to do its job.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of painting a truck? I mean, does the circus come to you with an idea?
Not anymore. Usually, I'm so well known that they say, okay, this is what we'd like to see. The basic, they give me a general idea of what they'd like to see, and then I take it from there. Some circuses are really particular. For instance, Kelly Miller is an all-red circus. All the trucks are red. So that limits what kind of color you can put on that truck. These are white trucks. They were easy because, you could put any color you wanted. It came right back at you, vibrant and clear and shiny. But painting a truck was one of the cheapest things the show owner could do to refurbish his show. And so every winter, they repainted all these trucks, all went through a barn, and they all got spray painted white. And then they were lined up at another barn, 3 at a time. There's big barns, 3 at a time, and I would set scaffolding all the way around them, and so that I could walk at the height that I needed to paint all the way around. And I'd paint them just as fast as I could paint them. I would paint 12 hours a day. But you start out with a blank slate like this, and you pop lines all the way across there in order to lay out. And then you come back with charcoal, and you lay out the letters, get them all drawn in there exactly as you want them, the circles, the scroll work. And some people made patterns and did this. I never really did that. I just did it by hand. And I got to the point where I can throw a scroll work across the top and sides of a truck. Just by looking at it, I can say, well, this is the way it's going to go, and bam, 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 and you can paint it. I do it all with an 1.5 inch brush. Everything that you see is done with an 1.5 inch brush, and you got really fast at it. You mixed all your paints in the morning so that your big paints were there, and I'd add a little linseed oil so that it wouldn't dry so fast, and a little bit of thinner. And once I got a layout on there, I just pick up the red. We go down and do all the red, then I come back with the yellow and do all the yellow and the blue, and et cetera, et cetera. These blue circles, you'd have to paint the blue circle on there first, and then come back and do the lettering on top of it. So usually did the blue circles first. All the blue circles went on first. And then you'd come back and paint all the red and yellow and the striping and all of that stuff. And then at the end, you'd come back and letter these individual circles out because they'd be dry enough to do that. I could paint a truck like this sometimes in a day back in those days, especially if it's a white truck. Now, Kelly Miller, the difference in Kelly Miller is that everything has to be double coated because of the red background. When you put yellow on that truck, you've got to double coat that yellow. Everything that you put on there, you have to double coat. So it's like doing a truck twice. But I've been painting so long that I just can look at a truck and say, okay, this is what it needs. I paint for Culpeper Merriweather Circus over in Hugo. Most of the painting that's on that show, I've done it. I painted for Carson and Barnes over there, which is a show my brother works for right now. I painted for certainly Kelly Miller, Fisher Brothers Circus, Hoxie Tucker Circus, Great American Circus, King Brothers Circus, Sells and Gray Circus, Clyde Beatty Circus, and a few dozen more thrown in there. These are all some of the major shows that I've painted for over the years. But it's just a certain type of art, bright and colorful with scroll work and pictures. And you can see on this truck, we do a lot of pictures, panels of the different acts and things that are on that show. And you see people coming out and taking pictures of these all over the country. You know, wherever we go, they line up and they take all these individual pictures. But these would change on a yearly basis. You change the performance, you change all of this.
And when you're creating those panels, are you working from photographs or are you
Usually out of my head. A lot of times I'll do a sketch, and I've got hundreds of sketches all over of sketches that I do for trucks and things. And I'll do a sketch and I'll get it in my head what I want, and then I'll just go up there and draw it on there. And you learn to draw huge, really big, and you're doing elephants and lions and stuff bursting out of the truck or whatever. You just got used to it. I didn't set up a lot of patterns. I'd do a small sketch and say, okay, that's about the way I want it to look. And I'd go and take it to the truck and draw it on there by hand. Some show painters use patterns, and they'd set out paper and they'd make little pounce patterns, and then they'd use that. But to me, you couldn't do that because every truck is an individual truck. Every truck has different windows, different doors, different, so you had to fit every piece of artwork to the truck, the individual truck. And of course, you haven't seen one of these shows, have you? Kelly Miller would be my suggestion for you to actually see the show. It comes into Ardmore toward the end of the year if you ever really want to see it. But you can see right there that it's like the cookhouse truck has certain idiosyncrasies that you have to work with. I remember doing a truck on Culpeper where they had a vinyl awning that came down over the door. It was just a big flap on the truck, but it screwed up my layout so much. So I actually went over and painted the vinyl awning so that when it was laying there, the whole truck looked symmetrical. Now, when they opened that door and the awning went up, it didn't look the same. But of course, my idea was when it was going down the road, it had to look sharp. And when Kelly Miller pulls into town with its 6 or 7 semis, all red, all with the beautiful pictorials and scroll work and lettering all over them, you can't miss that. In a small town, that's a big deal. They pull all these trucks out to a lot and they get them all in their position, and up the tent goes. And performance at 4 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock at night. And by the time the last show was over, it's a funny thing about shows, you started tearing down when the last show started. As the last show begins, as each act is finished, that equipment comes out, goes into its individual owner's truck or to the owner's truck, and they load it. You're already taking up stakes, seats that aren't necessary or removed early. You're already in a process of tearing down and moving to the next town when the last show starts.
Constant motion.
It is constant motion. A circus has its own electrical department. It has its own cookhouse department. It has its own mechanic department. It has its own performance director and staff management. It's all departmentalized, and it all works like a well-oiled machine. We played Camp Lejeune one time and with the Clyde Beatty Circus. And I'm standing out there, and here's a captain in the Marine Corps standing out there. So I walked over to talk to him because on Marine base, it's all Marines. And he had stood there for 2 solid hours watching us take that thing down. It was a Sunday afternoon. And he said, he said, we could learn a lot from you people. And I said, you could. You could. The only time in my military career that I was asked to do anything with a tent was I was stationed at Fort Belvoir in Washington, D.C., and they were having riots in Washington, D.C. They brought in the 82nd Airborne, and we had to go out as a troop and set up their tents in the middle of the night so that they had someplace to be when they got there. So out there at the airfield, I sort of took charge of setting up these tents because I could do it. I could set up their tents in 5 minutes, so I knew what I was doing. And that's the only time that ever came up. I had a strange distinction there when I first got to Fort Belvoir. Before I went to Vietnam, I was in riot control, and we were taught to move down the streets. They didn't give us loaded guns, but they gave us guns and bayonets, and they said, this is the way you do it. And we literally backed people down streets in Washington, D.C. during the riots. When I came back, I was on the other side. I was doing some of the rioting. I was still in the military, but I was on the other side. And they were rioting about Kent State at the time. And I was part of that riot, got tear gassed just like everybody else, but felt like we were doing the wrong thing by the time I came back. When I went over, I was just a kid. I mean, I looked like I might have been 15. And I didn't know anything about politics or war or anything else. 6 months in country, that all changed for me. And I learned a lot. And I was not too happy with what I finally woke up and found myself in. So when I got back, I was on the other side. And we did everything we could to stop the war. And it worked. It worked.
Well, besides painting the trucks, did you do any of the poster work?
I have done a few posters. I did a lot of work like that for Clyde Beatty. For their marketing department, they would have a problem and they would come to me and say, well, can you give us a layout with an elephant in it? Or can you do this and make it this way, And I do a lot of that. I got trained in the Army as a printer. I was in psychological operations, and I got trained in the Army as a printer. And that training helped me do stuff that was camera-ready artwork. I'd never been formally trained except for that little training I got in the military to do it. But that's why I picked it up. And that's what gave me the thirst to go back to school. And I went to Southeastern State University here for 2 years. And I loved it. Boy, I just thought that art history, I ate it up. I had no idea, why we do all these things and why we don't do these things. It all came to me as they were teaching me all this stuff. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated. I was not greeted very well by the other students because I shot up the curve, and because I always wanted to know why. I want to know why. Let's get into this, and find out why. And so I think I was a bane to some of the students. Most of my professors liked me a lot, though. And I still maintain ties with a lot of the professors that I worked with at school. It taught me a lot.
We understand that your grandfather painted windows.
I'll tell you the truth.
Or great-grandfather.
My grandfather my grandfather, both of my grandfathers painted, and I think all three of them did. I had three. My grandfather Jack, known as the Human Fly, and you've probably heard that story. Jack Williams, or he had several names, but Jack Williams, the Human Fly. That was quite a story in itself. But my grandpa Willie, who's the man that took my dad up after his dad was killed in Texas, he was a show guy too, and he was killed when my dad was 6. Well, I don't know how my grandpa Willie got in there, but he picked the boy up, my dad, and sent him to Catholic school in Circus, Arkansas, which changed my dad's life tremendously, and Willie paid for that. And from then on, Willie was my grandfather, and he's the only grandfather I really knew. And he would teach you a lot of things, but he was a painter too. He'd paint windows and store fronts. And he always taught me, he said, you got these brushes and you know how to handle them, you can just take those brushes and go anywhere and you'll make a living. You'll do fine. And it was true, because I stopped right here and did it. I had no clue what a sign man did or how signs were done or what to charge or anything else. I just grabbed my brushes, went down the road and said, you need a sign, I'll do a sign for you. And I learned my way. I finally went to work with another sign company for a year or so and learned a lot about the trade. But I learned enough to raise 2 children and send them to school. And my daughter's gone through college in the honors program. And she did that in 2 years, which really blew me away. And my son is still hoping to go to college at some point on the GI Bill. But no, it was a way that I could stay with my family. My family could stay right with me. We worked together, and we accomplished everything that way. My wife worked with me in the sign business, and we transferred that. I painted signs all over the place. I don't know if you saw the mural over in the elementary school. We've done 2 or 3 murals over there.
That's on our list. We haven't yet, but
No.
we will.
That's an interesting mural, because they came to me, they were building this school, and they wanted something to tie it to circuses, and it's brand new elementary school in Hugo. So they give me this loft and they said, paint 3 rings of the circus. And I did. And I painted this act going on here, and this act going in the center ring, and this act going in the 3rd ring. There's usually 3 rings. And then on the 5th, there were 5 walls. And on the 2 end walls, I painted the 2 show owners, biggest show owners in town. One of them was my brother David, the other was D.R. Miller. And their portraits are there on the ends. And then there's this 3-ring circus. I don't know what happened or who told who, but the Daily Oklahoman did a front page spread on it in color, which blew me away. It kind of made all the other artists in the state mad, I'm sure, because I was a complete unknown. But I did that mural. I also did a mural called The Heritage of Hugo. And they came to me and said, we want you to do this mural on this building. The building's since burned and gone away. I have a video of the mural. But I said, well, what is the heritage of Hugo? And they said, well, we really don't know. And I spent 6 weeks researching that so I could make a drawing of this mural. They didn't really know what the heritage of Hugo was. I know more about it than most people that live in Hugo now. But I did a huge mural for that, telling of all the little things that happened in Hugo's life and how it came to be and its connection with the circus. I don't know if you know it, you've heard of Ringling, Oklahoma out here. Believe it or not, that's circus oriented. There was never a circus there. But Ringling Brothers had wanted to move their winter quarters from Baraboo, Wisconsin, where it was too cold for the animals, down here. So one of the Ringling Brothers came down here. They had a track that went through Ringling, Oklahoma. It wasn't Ringling, Oklahoma. It was nothing. And he bought a bunch of land there, and he was going to put a circus winter quarters there for Ringling Brothers. Or they never did it. It never panned out. But if you drive into Ringling today, you'll see a little circus tent that says, "Welcome to Ringling," with little flags on top of it. And that's their claim to show business. They never had a show there. They never saw a show winter there. But that's why it's called Ringling, Oklahoma. Hugo was always the big town for circuses. And when I grew up in Hugo, there was a dozen circuses that wintered in Hugo. And the schools were oriented to it. You were never there in the summer. You were a student only in the winter, and you left a month early and you came back a month late. And the schools were fine with that at first. It was all right. Now, later on, the state mandated that we couldn't do that. But that's why we particularly settled in Hugo. The banks were a little more, I mean, my dad would come in and sometimes he'd have to make a loan just to get through the winter so that he could get out on the road. And they got to know him and realized that he'll pay me when he gets on the road. And we always did. And so they had a good working relationship and still do in Hugo. I think the circus people are taken in stride in Hugo. They can live comfortably there and raise their families there without too much. I remember in school being called a gypsy a few times and things like that, but nothing serious. They pretty much put up with us. We didn't really feel part of being a student in a high school or something because we always left early and came late. So we weren't really a part, and all these kids did their summer things and summer trips, and we never did any of that. We were working all the time. So it's a little bit different, but Hugo was a good town to grow up in. My father actually took a job as a radio announcer at the local radio station in the wintertime, and they liked him a lot. He reported the news. In fact, he gave me a sheet of paper a few years ago where Kennedy was shot, and he got it off the AP, and he was the one that reported that news in Hugo when it happened. And he gave me that, before he passed away. I still have that paper stuck somewhere when Kennedy was shot over the AP wires. But we interrelated. My mom and dad would take jobs in the wintertime in Hugo. They worked in a hardware store. They worked as a radio announcer. They did all kinds of things just to get through the winter. My mom was given $25 a week, and she usually had to feed 12 people and maintain a house on $25 a week. We weren't allowed to go to the refrigerator and have a glass of milk. That was completely off limits. Meals were served, we got so much. And if you wanted seconds, if it was a meal where we could have seconds, we got it. But for the most part, you never went in the kitchen to ask for food in between meals or anything like that. We were poor people. And we lived most of our lives in poverty, abject poverty. We carried our water. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We lived really rough. Baths were once a week. They'd fill up a tub, and they'd put the oldest kid in and then work their way down to the youngest kid. Same water, same tub. Water was at a premium. I'm sure that's the way they did it in the pioneer days, for the most part. But it was a different way to grow up. But I did love performing. I loved going out there. Now, the one time that I didn't like it was when my dad came to me one time. He was a manager at King Brothers Circus. I was working for him. I was a tight wire walker. I was a trampoline performer. I did rolling globe. And I worked the sideshow. I did the bark ring on the sideshow and set up the sideshow, tore it down, took care of the animals. It was quite a bit to do. But he came to me one day and said that one of the clowns quit. He said, "You're going to be a clown tomorrow." I said, "All right." I have no idea what a clown did, how to be a clown. And I put on the makeup. I've seen them do it. And I put on the makeup and I got myself an outfit. And I went out and tried to be as funny as I could. And I was a flop. The biggest flop I ever did. I thought, I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. And then a guy named Antar was on. The comedian did an acrobatic act as a comedian. Came along and explained to me what a clown does and how a clown acts. You don't act silly. You don't act goofy. You act serious. All these mishaps that are happening to you are serious, and you are serious about it. You climb a ladder and you fall down. You've got to make it. You really want to get to the top of that ladder, And falling down, that's just part of, And people relate to people getting hurt. And they can see that maybe they're not really hurt, but at the same time, you whack a clown and it's just funny. You drop a clown's pants, it's funny. You are always prepared as a clown because a clown is an emergency guy too. I don't know if Popcorn told you some of his stories, but I always kept a balloon in my vest because if an act went wrong, the program director or announcer would turn around and say, "Okay, get in there and fill in." And you'd go out there and blow up the balloon and pop it, and you blow it, and then you say, "You want to see it bigger?" Of course, they want to see it bigger, so you blow it some more until you got it huge, and then it finally popped, knocked you down, you fell over, and that filled up 5 minutes while they straightened out that rigging over there. You always had something on you that you could run in there and do as a clown. But I got to where I liked clowning. I was always the fool, the guy that got knocked around, the guy that got blown up with the dynamite, the guy that got run over, that was me, because I was acrobatic at the time. I was supple enough to do that sort of thing. Popcorn was more of the boss clown when he worked. I never worked with Popcorn as a clown, but we've done so many gags, and they're the same gags, that we know each other pretty well, and we know how we work together. But Popcorn's a very good clown. Very good clown. You'll never see him work again. The last time he put on his makeup was the day D.R. Miller died. And he made national news that day because his picture was all across the country. My brother was D.R. Miller's protege for the most part for a long, long time. And I think it's kind of neat that David's working for the circus, for D.R.'s circus. And eventually, I think David's needed over there, and I think he will help that circus survive. A lot of my family, most of them are out of show business now. David and his daughter, Sasha, are still working in show business. I still work in show business when I paint and all that. But I have a sister that's a principal, a retired principal in Houston, who was a beautiful aerialist, did beautiful work, was a tight wire walker. We actually had an act together for several years. She was the female and I was the male tight wire walker. And my other sister, Margaret, who works in a bank over here in Calera, used to be one of the most beautiful aerials I ever saw. She could fly through the air and just look beautiful doing anything, and she was good. My brother Michael, who has a tent rental business in the area here, rents all these fireworks tents that you see all over the place. He never liked performing, so he went into concessions, and he was always in concessions. From the time he was about 6 years old, all the way through, he never went into performing at all. My brother Chris went into a little bit of performing, but really didn't do that. He went more for boss canvassman and things like that. He was kind of like the roustabout pusher, the big tough guy that can push all these guys around and get it all done, you know. But none of them are in show business now. Occasionally Chris will go out and book a town for a show, because he still does a little of that. So in this area, he'll book like Medill or Kingston or any of these towns. He'll get them a sponsor and get them a lot and get it set. And he does that in the wintertime from time to time, just as extra work. That's about the only affiliation he has with shows anymore.
What do you miss most about actually working on a show?
Well, I guess I got to where I was so comfortable as a manager on Clyde Beatty. Pardon me. I knew what I was doing. That by the end of the year, you would be able to walk out. It's like being on a ship, I guess. But you walk out to the midway and everything worked so well, and everybody got along, and I really enjoyed, you know, that mellowness of show. When show people can get together, they have a lot of fun. They enjoy themselves. It's like a reunion, I guess, anywhere else, like these homecomings and all of that stuff. And show people do that. And I like that part about show business. I liked it when I was a performer. I liked the applause. And certainly you miss things like that. But there are a lot of things I don't miss about show business. There's no privacy in a circus. If you're arguing with your wife, everybody knows about it. And there's just nothing that's private on a circus. And that's one of the reasons I live down here. It's private. And I don't let a lot of people into my private life because it's something I protect, something I never had before. And so I protect it. But I miss a lot of things about show business. When you're sitting there on the sidelines and somebody rides into the center ring on a horse and does these tricks and it's just fantastic and the audience just loves it and the band's playing, and you just can't help but say, you know, I want to be a part of this, you know. And I still feel that even today. My brother produced a circus for the great Milwaukee Circus Parade. And it was one of the finest shows I ever saw. And he'd only produced it for 5 days. Took all the equipment, got all the performers together, got it all up into Milwaukee, and he had me come with him to help. And putting that show on, it was the finest show. They had 6 circuses there at the time. David's was the finest show on the Midway, and just done so well. And I just love being a part of it. I mean, he shot cannon shots, twin cannon shots of guys flying over the big top and landing in nets on opposite sides. And that's something I've never seen before in my life. When a cannon shot goes off, that trajectory is planned to an nth degree. But when it happened in the Beatty show, we shot the guy down the length of the tent, right beside the center poles. If you get off a little bit, you got rigging everywhere. It had to be just a precise shot at just a precise moment. These guys couldn't even see their nets, and they would shoot from their cannons on either side and land in these nets and pass each other in midair over the top of the tent. Incredible feat. And the cannon people were actually retired algebra teacher was in charge of that. And he lived in a little bitty tent where we put his cannons on. He was a retired algebra teacher, and he calculated that shot to the nth degree because his son was the other cannon guy. And I'd never seen a shot like that before. I've seen some wild things in show business. I took a truckload of elephants to Wall Street, along with about 3 other shows. They gathered up this herd of elephants, and they wanted the herd of elephants to stampede down Wall Street, and that was the shot they wanted. It was for a floppy disk commercial. And to get an elephant to do that, to get all these strange elephants together, early 5 o'clock in the morning on Wall Street, wet Wall Street down, close it off by the police, all this nonsense, and you got all this herd of elephants, and they're all nervous as hell. Then they glued African ears to Asian elephants, and they glued tusks. Now, we had one elephant that had huge tusks. The rest of them were Asian with small tusks. So they glued these giant tusks onto these. All these things are strange to an elephant. And then you have the elephant stampede with a bunch of strange elephants down Wall Street, which is what you taught them all their life not to ever do. And it was an all-day affair. I was totally washed out and exhausted by the end of the day, but we accomplished it. And somewhere in the archive somewhere is that commercial of those elephants charging down Wall Street. And they'll never know what a struggle it was to actually produce that. But there's hundreds and hundreds of stories. I mean, we get to talk, and I get to talking with Popcorn, and hundreds of stories of runaway trucks, of fires, of blowdowns and tornadoes, and the struggles that we all went through. And when show people get together, those stories just start flying. And it doesn't matter where we are. I mean, I can get with any show guy, and we're talking about the old days. And we all know them. We all heard the stories. We all know the stories, and we were part of it. And I think it was exciting. I think it's something that's going to go away. They've almost regulated it out of business because you've got to remember, each state, each truck has to be permitted, et cetera, et cetera. Each animal has to be permitted, health check, et cetera, et cetera. And all of the people that you have to have, and nobody wants to work that hard. Nobody wants to work that hard. If you're born in it, you know you work that hard. But if you're not, nobody wants to do that. So it's a dying art. It's going away. And I'm sorry to see that. I'm planning to do a series of paintings. And I'm a sort of a realist painter. I'm working on trying to get it like Michelangelo's figures of people doing simple things around the circus. Give you an idea. Can I get up a minute? Just give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm working on an idea, and it's just a simple picture of a guy carrying a center pole. I'm trying to work it out so that it is simple. I want it to be very, very simple. But I'm trying to get that flow and that movement in there at the same time. And I want to do everything that a guy would do around a circus, like drive a stake, or tie off a rope, or do this, carry a pole, or handle an elephant, or all of the things that the workers do around the show. And I want to reproduce that in painting. These are my new sketchbooks. I don't have any of my old sketchbooks right here. This is one. this one. I wanted to show you because there are some ideas that you were asking about trucks and stuff. Can't find the right sketchbook. I got so many. Well, this is just sign work. I wish I could find a sketchbook with, and it gives you the ideas that I come up with in these sketches. For
this one, white box.
yeah, well, that's a sign actually. It's not. Should be some in there. Those are signs that that's how you get ready to do a sign.
Do you have a lot of time that you spend dedicated to your art outside of sign making?
Yeah, I always wanted to get away from sign making. Sign making is so boring, and the biggest problem with sign making is that you have to paint the backside the same as the front side. We finally got into the computer. We did it computer generated, and I hated that even worse because all the signs you see now are generated by computer. So I will do a sign now, but only from somebody that knows me. And they say, okay, this is what I wanted to say. Now leave me alone and don't ask me any questions and I'll do your sign for you. And that's the way I do my artwork. That's the drawing for my grandmother in there. But I take a lot of time now.
So the focus of your art today, it's not just circus related.
No, my art is politically related, but I also want to preserve the simple things around a circus, a show lot. And you've seen hundreds of pictures, my mother has hundreds of them, of people sitting in the backyard smoking a cigarette before they go in and do their act. These are the kind of things, the life that we led. I want to portray that on canvas. I want to do that on canvas. I don't know that anybody would want that or put that in their living room or anything like that, but I want to do it because at least they'll be there. They'll be, after I'm gone, they'll still be there. And yes, so I do a lot of circus genre work, but I do a lot of politically motivated work. I do some stuff just for fun, but those are the things I'm serious about, and that's what I want to do. And hopefully, I'm just about getting to the point in my life where I can do it.
And do you show your art anywhere?
I have shown my art. It was published in the Southeastern magazine, and I've done 2 or 3 shows through Southeastern College. They don't like my work because it's not a body of work as they describe it. A body of work is you paint a pair, and then you paint a pair again, and you paint a pair again, and that's a body of work. All your work should be similar. And I got kicked out of a couple of shows because none of my work is similar. I do animals, I do people, I do, and I don't have a body of work. It just jumps around too much. But I have shown in several. I have not made it a point to push it very much because when I'm gone, I figure my wife can do whatever she wants with the paintings. It might be, in the end, it might be a retirement, help her in her retirement or something like that. But yes, I've designed a studio in here and my shop out there so that I can find some alone time and do these paintings. And I'm going to do more and more. They're all through the house. I don't know if you've seen them everywhere, but they're all through the house. Would I show them? Sure, I'd show them almost anywhere. But I just haven't had a big inkling to do that. One of the problems with being an artist is that you have to schmooze. You have to go to these little dinner parties. You have to talk about this. You have to describe your art and all that. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it. I can do it. I don't have any trouble talking to the public about anything, but I don't want to do that where my art's concerned. I want my art to speak for itself. Don't ask me to describe it. Don't ask me to enhance it some way. Just you like it or you don't like it, and to me, that's the way it ought to be.
Some of the same characteristics a good booking agent would have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A good booking agent's hard to find these days. Very hard to find. My brother David is doing that for Carson and Barnes right now, and it's a difficult proposition. But I sat down with him when we sort of worked out a little plan before he took that job on how to get it under control, because a lot of people don't understand the logistics of a circus, and it takes a great deal of effort and time. Even in his job, a circus comes to town, he's already squared the lot. He's got the sponsor. He sent them the tickets. He set up the bill posting and the advertising and the radio and the TV. And he's done all that from that office over there. At the same time, when the circus leaves, you got to come back. Was the sponsor happy? Was the lot clean? Would you take us again next year or the year after that? You have to do all of these logistics from this office to keep that thing out there on the road. And if you don't do that right, this is going to fall on its face. And I've been on shows that didn't make it because they just didn't have a good enough, what we call the front end. They didn't have a good front end. And the net is getting higher. I don't know if you know about the net. The net is the expenses that it takes for a show to operate during a day. And for instance, our net on Clyde Beatty was about $27,000 a day. We had to make that much to make any profit. The term comes from in the olden days when shows traveled with wagons and horses. And when the show came into town and set up, they would buy feed and food for the performers and everything from the general store in town. And they'd say, well, we'll pay you after the performance tonight. Well, the merchant in town would take the nut off of the wagon wheel and keep it in his store until that night when they came and paid for the goods that they bought that day. And that's called making the nut. I have to make the nut. And that's where that came from. There's so many circus sayings, it's ridiculous.
$27,000 for one day. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. No, we had to get a lot of people through there all the time. It had to be full all the time. Now in Clyde B, they did a little bit different. Now we got to where we set up for 2, 2, and 3 is what they called it. You set up 2 days in this town, 2 days in this town, and 3 days on the weekend town. On the second day, after they'd seen the performance the first day, the first few people that came to the show, the second day was always full. It was always full because that's the mark of a good performance, a good circus performance. One of the finest I've ever seen was with Clyde Beatty. When they came out of it, I was the manager. I was on the gate. I solved all the problems going in. Who gets a seat? Who got messed around? Who did this? How much did I have to pay? All this stuff that you have to solve when they go in. When they came out, did you enjoy the show? I loved the show. Loved the show. I would come and see it again, and the next day the tent would be full. Whenever you stay in a town long enough, but you got to understand these days, like Kelly Miller, comes into town, 5 o'clock in the morning, they're setting up the tent. Some guy drives by and says, hey, there's a circus out there in the field. By the time he gets off work that night, it's 5 o'clock. He gets his kids together, rounds them up, and tries to get down to the circus. Some people make it, but for the most part, everybody says, well, I'll catch that on the weekend. Or I'll see that tomorrow. Then I'll go to that same field the next day, and there's nothing there. Nothing. Not even a paper popcorn bag. And, you know, it's difficult for town people to relate to that. I didn't know that till I was a town person. And you come in, and I brought shows in. And you come in and, geez, you just haven't got time for that. You got kids going to school. You got a basketball game tonight. When are you going to go to the circus? And these days, the circus is an expensive proposition. If a family of 4, you better have $100, $150 in your pocket to go to a circus. Because that's what it costs to operate these things, pay these people, buy your insurance, and do all the things necessary to make the net. No, I do miss it, and yes, I do have many fond memories of the circus, and yes, I'm still involved.
Do you prefer the canvas tent circuses to the indoor circuses?
They were always, the quintessential circus to me was under the canvas. It's a completely different feel all the way around. If you're putting it up, or even if you're around it, it's a completely different feel. But in those days, circuses were close-knit families. And I enjoyed that. I mean, a Sunday afternoon in Canada, they have blue law. So Sundays, you couldn't show Sundays. That was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. We got a day off. And we'd play baseball together. And we'd have picnics together. And we'd have cookouts together on that day off. It was great. It was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to a show. I always thought, my God, I ought to have that day off down in America where we play all the time. But really no such thing as a day off in the circus. As a manager, I hated the day off because all these people get off for a day, and you got to put it all back together the next day. And they're all kind of wore out from being tired of doing whatever entertainment that they wanted to do for that day off. I always dreaded days off on Clyde B. Now, back in the old days, it was a lot slower. There were gravel roads. The trips over were slower. The actual jump, what they called the jump, which was one lot to the next, was usually short, 30, 35 miles at most. And you'd get in and you'd set up. And when I was a kid, I loved it because we'd come in and heck, the lot, we'd always be waiting to see what the lot was because it could be a fairgrounds. That was always great. We could explore the grandstands. We could explore the old barns. We could do this. Or if it was a nice grassy park area or something like that, or there was a swimming pool next door. I mean, every day was a new adventure, a new place, a new town. And you try to make the most out of that. And when you hit the lot, you did your chores as fast as you could so that you could go explore, get away and go explore the woods or the creek down there or the pond over there. And we did a lot of that. And yeah, I loved that part of show business. And we weren't treated too badly. Now, there were places where we went in as kids, dime stores and stuff, and they'd say, "You with that circus?" And we'd say, "Yes, sir." And we were always taught to say yes sir, no sir, because we had to be on our best behavior, always, when we were around town people. And I'd say, "Yes, sir." And they'd say, "Well, get out of here. We don't want you in here stealing our stuff," things like that. But that happens anywhere you go with anything you do. It was always neat to see because they bring school kids out in buses and troop them around the tent and show as you're going up. And we were always just as curious about these kids as they were about us. But people would have a tendency, you'd be in your trailer, and people would have a tendency to come and open your screen door in the trailer to see what you were doing because they thought it's part of the circus. You're supposed to be in here in makeup, juggling, or something like that. And that privacy issue was always a problem with me. I always didn't like that. But there were so many things about the circus that I did like a lot. And good people that would go a long ways to help you or do for you. And you could find that anywhere in the country in the old days. You could find show people in Florida or Texas or Oklahoma. You knew where they were, And if you were down on your luck, you needed a steak, they'd do it. And then they'd say, "Come back in the spring, I'll have a job for you." Things like that.
Do you have memories of the modern trailer park in Hugo living beside it?
I sure do.
Share.
Sure do.
Share
I lived down there for a long time. We lived in a little trailer there with several other circus people that lived there, and I grew up with their kids. We would actually share responsibility of the kids. My mom would watch your kids, your mom would watch her kids, and all of that stuff in the trailer park. And we all knew each other. We were all show people. We went out on different shows, but in the wintertime, we knew. We could talk to each other. We were show people. And I have fond memories. First house I ever remember living in, other than in Max Creek, was a little house that was in the middle of that trailer park. My dad rented it one year, and that's where we lived, in that trailer park. It was in a little house. That's the first house I really remember living in. There were a lot of fond memories of Hugo because there were so many show people and because the town people interrelated with us, correlated with us. There wasn't a problem that we were circuses. My brother was probably one of the most popular kids in school, played football, was top honors everywhere, and everybody liked him. I wasn't so much because of my accident, I wasn't there a lot. I had like 3 years where I was completely out of the picture. And so it was a little different for me. But most of my family were received very well in Hugo and lived comfortably there on next to nothing. It's a great little town. I always like going back to Hugo. I always feel like some sort of a little bit of a celebrity going back to Hugo because I know everybody and everybody knows me and we get along real well. Usually I'm doing some sort of art project over there. I worked on a project in the new library there And I painted little pictures of animals around the ring curb in the library, and they had a circus wagon put up there in the kids section, and I did all the scroll work and painting on it. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but that was one of the last projects I did for the town. But I've done several murals and several paintings, and Angie's Circus City Diner. I did all the artwork for their menus and their signs and all that stuff, and a lot of my artwork is in pictures inside that place. That's where I eat lunch every day when I'm painting over there. And Margaret, the waitress over there, knows me so well. I come in at 11:15. She has my lunch sitting right there, my coffee sitting right there. I get my stuff, and I'm back at work in 15 minutes. And she knows me very well. And it's the little things about Hugo that make it neat. I know everybody out at Showman's Rest. I think I know just about everybody that's buried in Showman's Rest. A lot of them are my relatives, my friends. Most of those people are dead. And I'm really sorry to see this form of entertainment begin to fade out from American life, because it's an American story like no other, I think. There's a picture somewhere of my mom and dad. My mom's in her tight wire costume. My dad's dressed as a clown. And all of us kids are strung out in front of them, and one of them's on her hip, and it's a black and white photograph. I always wanted to send that to King Burns for the American experience. That photograph's all I'd have to show him, and he could take it from there. Because there's just such a big story to be told. I mean, my mother's story is like a miracle. And she just went through heart surgery. We found out the other day that she'd had this heart problem all her life. I remember taking her down when she was hung up in rigging where she'd pass out because of this condition right here. And you'd have to take the rigging down and then remove her from the rigging. She had strokes over this. And, she lived this all of her life, raised all these kids, did all this performing. And just at the end of toward the end of her life, she finds out she has a severe heart problem that's been with her since she was a child. It's incredible what she did. I don't know another woman on earth that could do what she did. And when I got married, I said, I want a woman that can do something like my mama. And I married Mary. She happened to be named Mary. It just happened that way. But we've been together 30 years. I keep telling her, as soon as I find somebody better, she's out of here. But haven't done that yet. She's quite a woman too. And I wish I'd have known her earlier in my performing career, because I think she would have been good at it. She would have been very good at it.
You've got to have special memories performing with your mother then.
Oh, yeah. I remember my mother walking a tight wire when she was 6 months pregnant. Walking on a tight wire. Oh, yeah, fond memories of that. My father, not quite as fond. My father was a great man, but the tactics that they use to train children in show business are rough. They're rough. I remember when I never seen a trampoline before. And all of a sudden we're supposed to be trampoline performers. Well, in order to teach you how to do that trick, because you're a kid, you're scared. Halfway through the trick, you're going to do what they call balking, which is I'm afraid to do this trick and I can't do it, and you usually wind up getting hurt. My uncle would stand over here, my dad would stand over here. They both had leather belts. They said, okay, now you're going to do this trick or you're going to get whaled. And you did the trick. And that's the way we learned. That's the way all family kids learn. I mean, on tumblers, you'd see them in the backyard with their kids, teaching them how to tumble. If they didn't do the trick, they got whacked for it. That was the way it was. Didn't mean your folks didn't love you. It meant that you were part of the support of this family and you had a responsibility. And that started at about age 5. And so you did that. I never held it against my folks for training me that way or putting me in those situations. I wanted eagerly to be a part of that. And I would go through what anybody else today would say, that's abuse. Well, it wasn't abuse. I knew farm kids that got it far worse than we did. But that's just the way it was in those days. And you train kids that way. And I guarantee you, when we went to a restaurant, on the rare occasions when we'd go to a restaurant on a Sunday afternoon, we'd troop in there with 6 kids, and waitresses would look and say, "Oh my God, here it comes." And we'd sit there, and not one of us ever made a sound. If somebody addressed us, it was yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. But we never made a sound. And my dad said, "Go have a hamburger, 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 hamburger," like that. And if he even looked at you, you were doing something naughty or something wrong, if he even looked at you, you were in trouble. And so we had to be on our best behavior all the time. And that was drilled into us constantly. And especially in front of the public, if you're wearing wardrobe, you're a performer. And I don't care. I've worked with a broken ankle. I've worked with the busted tendons. I've worked with the 102 fever. It doesn't matter whether it's raining, whether it's cold, whether it's too hot. It doesn't matter. 2 shows a day, every day. And you do it, and you do it with a smile. That's discipline. And most kids don't see that kind of discipline. But it was the kind of discipline that saved my brother's life and probably mine in Vietnam. You know. So, is there anything else I can answer? I probably missed a lot. There's 1,000 things I could tell you, but I just don't know all of the things to say. I just know that there's so much.
So you actually stopped performing when you were in your mid-30s
because it was getting
stress
I
on the
mean, I
body.
already busted both the tendons. I did a trick on the wire. At the finish of the wire act, I would turn to the audience, standing on the wire, side straight toward the audience. The wire goes this way. Well, to walk a wire, you have to keep your eye on that end of the wire while you're walking. And when you turn around, you immediately get your vocal on this end of the wire. To turn toward the audience, you lose all sense of balance. But the final trick in the wire was I would do my finish trick. I would stand up, I would face the audience like this, and then I would throw my hands up in the air and fall. And my knees would catch the wire. I'd swing around, flop up, and come standing on my feet on the ground. And that was always kind of a tough trick because it cut into your tendons every time you did it. But no matter how bad the tendons were, you had to do it twice the next day. I mean, if you were hurt or cut or anything, I mean, you still did it. You still did your act, no matter what. There was no such thing as being sick. I can't put up the tent today, I'm sick. Or it's raining cats and dogs out there, and mom still sends you out there. Now, there were sometimes it was so bad that when we got in, we were so cold and wet and miserable that she would feed us all a teaspoon of old granddad whiskey and put us to bed, you know. But we slept in odd places. The trailer got to be smaller and smaller and smaller as time went on. My dad built a little box on the back of the truck where my brother and I lived, and it was just big enough for 2 bunks. Didn't have any windows. It had a little door, but there was no door on it, just the opening. And we had 2 bunks in there, and that's where David and I lived for a long time, because there just wasn't any room in the trailer. Can you imagine mom and dad and grandpa and 6 kids or 8 kids? Well, there's just no room. So you spent most of your time outside or living nearby or something like that. And those are cool times, you know. I didn't mind it. Riding in the back of trucks and things like that wasn't too bad. You always had that anticipation of what's going to be in the next town. What's going to be, who am I going to meet? What am I going to do in the next town? And that was always something to look forward to. And the end of the season, the last day of the season, that's a big day in show business. People have a tendency to get silly. I know we had a flying act on the Beatty show, and the last day they all came out. One of them was dressed as Batman, one of them was Superman, you know, and they did their act dressed in these costumes, you know. Other people would play little jokes on people. They'd put jam all over the trapeze bar. Or they would put the wrong dog in the wrong box, and so the wrong dog would come out. Or they'd come in and carry out part of your equipment that you used for the act, so you had to ad lib or something. I mean, there were always jokes being played the last day of the season because everybody's so happy. We've been doing this 7 days a week for 32 solid weeks, and now we get to stop. We get to take it home and stop for the winter. But they're always just as anxious to get out in the spring. They're all out there painting their props and doing their practices and getting ready to go and can't wait for opening day, you know. So It has its ups and downs.
On the very last night of the season, when you do the spec,
Uh-huh.
what happens?
Oh, people just fool with each other. They do all kind. I mean, the wrong people are in the wrong lineup, and they're just playing little jokes on each other the whole time. Everybody's laughing and joking and playing little games, and it's kind of a neat time. Kelly Miller had this thing at the end of the season, was usually in November, early in October was Halloween. So Kelly Miller always had a reputation for having a big Halloween party on the show because it was 3 weeks before closing. And they'd all come dressed as different characters and stuff like that. And they did it every year. It got to be a pretty famous tradition on Kelly Miller. Kelly Miller was a tough show at first. Marriages didn't seem to work out too well on Kelly Miller. You know, it was such a well-oiled machine that it got to be boring. And as I think, and I don't know this, but I think that that made a problem for married couples because a lot of marriages broke up on Kelly Miller for a while. Marriages that had lasted for years and years, and they go on Kelly Miller, and all of a sudden they're going to get a divorce. You know, and it just was unbelievable. But Kelly Miller got to be such a well-oiled machine that people could do it without even thinking about it. And the show would be up and down and your next down, up and down and next down. Everything exactly the same every day. That'll get you down. And I think it got a lot of marriages down. I don't know why that went on. It was like a 3 or 4 year period where everybody seemed to go over on Kelly Miller and they'd get a divorce. Or they'd wind up, you know, the monkey girl would be with the elephant guy, you know, and all this stuff. And I think it was just because it was just too well-oiled of a machine. It's one of the finest operating little shows I ever saw. It is still a great little circus. My brother doesn't own it. John Ringling North owns it now. And I work for John in the winter, and they love my painting. And so I'll probably be working for them for several more winters until I can't do it anymore. And but it's still a great little show. And whenever I get around that show and watch that show, I get that old urge. You know, I just want to get back out there and do it, you know.
Be remastered then.
Yeah, I did that. I was a circus announcer for a long time. I was a sideshow barker for a long time. I've done just about every job there is to do on a circus. Much like the rest of my family, that's nothing special in my family. If you're on a circus and you might be a performer, but you also know how to set up a tent, to drive a stake, to operate a truck or a vehicle, or you know how the electric thing is laid out. You can do the 24-hour man job. You can do it all. We were trained to do everything. And so whenever you were on a circus, you were always called to do something outside your so-called job description. Popcorn's the only one I ever knew that had a contract. He actually had a contract as a clown. I never had a contract in all my performing days. I've never had a contract. But he had a contract, and he would say, look, I'm not doing that because it's not in my contract, you know. But he'd be the only one I know could say that because most people didn't have a contract. Most people, it was a handshake. It was, I know you, you know me. Okay, you're going to be on the show. You don't quit a show before the end of the season unless it's just impossible. You don't do that. You always stick it out through the season, and no matter what comes up, you have to continue on. I mean, just like me, I got my neck broke. I almost died when they told them I wasn't going to live till morning. I fooled them. But can you imagine? Here's your child with a broken neck, a crushed throat, and 3 years of hospital visits coming up, and we still have to go on with the circus. And they left me in hospitals and stuff. It was difficult to understand that kind of stuff, to make that stuff work. Sit in the hospital for months on end. Nobody comes to see you because they're all out there performing. They're all out working. And I understood that, but it was hard. It was hard. That was I think the darkest part of my life. You sit in a hospital day after day not knowing what operation we're going to do next. And I think I had somewhere 30, 40 operations, major operations. And my parents couldn't be there. My family couldn't be there. It was just, that's just the way it was, you know. I always wanted to run away from the hospital. I've never quite managed it. Of course, I had a broken neck.
So I ran away to the circus. Or you wanted to run away to the circus.
Well, that was our saying. I want to run away from home and join a circus. Well, I want to run away from the circus and join a home.
Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
I thank you for doing this someday, and I've already called my daughter and told her about it. I said someday my granddaughter may want to know. They go to the Library of Congress, and there'll be their grandpa spouting off baloney about circuses.
Well, we appreciate you inviting us into your home today.
Well, certainly. Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.